Hey guys, welcome to another episode. Today I have a really fun, really detailed tutorial for you about creating your own tool in Visual Basic script to extend your Excel functionality. We're going to build this awesome tool that I actually built for myself, and I use it every day when I have to aggregate different files in the same format, and I want to have them all imported in the same file where I can draw data from all the sheets and process it and do some business analytics with it. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying the videos, a thumbs will be appreciated and a sub will be awesome. You will need some pre-existing knowledge with VBA. If you just have like the basic understanding of how VBA works and how Excel works, this should be enough. I won't go into too much detail for some of the functions. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a professional programmer. I usually code my tools with referencing Google like 70% of the time. My point is always to just make something that works well, doesn't throw up too many errors, overall speeds up my workflow. So if that's what you're looking for, let's go ahead and build this awesome plugin in Visual Basic for applications to extend our Excel capabilities. So I'm here in Excel, and the first thing we're gonna do is open our developer tab. And if you don't see that, just go to customize the ribbon and make sure that you enable the developer tab here. And here's your Visual Basic IDE, or you can press Alt and F11. I'm gonna go into my personal XLSB file. This is the file where all your locally stored macros live. If you don't see that file, what you can do is just go ahead and record a macro. Just do something, stop recording, and now your macro will be in your developer tab in a brand new module. Just go delete that. I'm actually gonna just rename this module and use it. Select it, and here is its name. Gonna be import files to sheets. The only lines that we're gonna write in this macro will be the lines that would open our form. But let's just go ahead and create a new form, new user form. I'm gonna name it import files form. Here in the caption, I wanted to say import files to sheets. Okay, let me expand it a bit. Just move the immediate window a bit down. I'm actually gonna close it. Let's start building our form. I'm gonna start with a label up here, and this label is gonna say select files to import. Just expand it a bit. And I'm gonna place it about here. Maybe just a bit like that. So here we're gonna have our button that's gonna act as a browse button, which would allow us to select the files. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a new button. The name of the button, this is so each object has a name that we can use to refer to it within our code. Just to make it easier to remember all the names, I'm gonna give them like specific names. So this one is gonna be our browse button, and it's just gonna say browse. I'm gonna place that right below here, the same size, and I'm actually gonna make it a bit smaller. Then we need our location for import. So this would allow us to pick whether we want this to be a new file or one of the open files within Excel. We're not going to bother giving names to the labels because we're not going to be referring to them from our code. This one should be location for import. Here I'm going to add a drop-down list, a combo box. And this combo box would allow me to either pick a new file, which is going to be our first option, or it would also list all the open files. Let's just rename that to import location combo box. we're done with our importing and location controllers up here. So the next thing I want to have is I want to have a list of our files. Okay, I double-clicked on it and it created a click action in the code. So I'm just going to delete that because we still don't need it. If you just click and wait a bit, it's going to let you edit it directly here. So this is going to be our files list. And below it, we're going to have this one here. It says unknown. It's a list view. You can use a list box, but the list view allows us to have separate columns and a few more options. If you don't see that, what you need to do is go to Tools, References, and enable, I think it was this one, Object Library, but pretty much enable all the same ones that I have here. It's not going to be showing up here when it's not enabled, so you'll have to find it somewhere here in the Microsoft section and enable it. Click OK, and now you should see this one here. Just make a big, like maybe this big. I don't know. We can always change it later. I want it to be a big field because I want to have two columns. So one would show the file name and the other one the location where it's stored at. We just make that the same as that and get that a bit like that. The other thing we want to have is 3 buttons above our list view that would actually allow us to select all the files that we have or deselect all the files that we have and remove the ones that are selected. Let's say if by accident we select some files with our browse button, we'll have the option to remove them after that. And that's why all the files here will have checkboxes in front of them. And this would only be for removing the files once they're in here, and then it won't matter if they're checked or not for our processing of all the files. So let's go ahead, add a new button. Up here, make it slightly bigger, and the text here is going to be select all. Okay, we can just copy and paste that using Control-C and Control-V and just make it negative sign and select none. And copy paste that, line it up here and just remove selected. Okay, let's give our buttons here and our list view more appropriate names. This is going to be our select all button. This is going to be our select none button. And this will be remove selected button. Our list view, we're going to name it list view files. It's going to show all the files that we have here. I'm also going to allow checkboxes so that we'll be able to pick all the files. I would also prefer it if our appearance is flat, a bit flatter, because the boxy appearance doesn't quite match the other objects, be it that it comes from a different library. This, at least in my opinion, makes it look a bit better. Okay, I want those buttons on the top to be a bit bigger. Okay, and we can copy one of those, bring it down here, and just have a cancel button. And I'm gonna copy paste that once again and have process all files. Okay, let's make this one a bit bigger and this one as well. And now we can bring that up here and we pretty much have our design. We just need to name those 2 buttons at the bottom. So this is going to be our cancel button. I'm just gonna mark that it's a cancel button, and I'm also gonna name this one process files button. And that's it. We have our design, and now we can go ahead and start adding code. There are a few ways to do that. So we can either have a right click on the form and type in view code, or as we have the form open, we can pick the one that we're going to start with and just add code for it. And also you can open the code if you double click anywhere on the empty space. And it creates a user form click function, but we're not going to be using that. What we can do is, you see here that we have user form and the click event. What we want is the initialize event. Here we're going to type all the code that will be run once our user form is open. So this is the initialization, and this is where we're going to populate all our fields with specific information. Okay, let's go ahead and start coding. Okay, before we start typing any code, let's make this a bit bigger so it's easier for you to see. I'm going to go to Tools, Options, and here in the editor format, just bring that up to 14 so it's a bit more readable. Let's double click here to go back to our form, and the first thing we want to do is let's just go ahead and set up our cancel button. If we double click on it, it's going to add a cancel button underscore click, which is the action that would happen when we click it. And you see that here we're not within our modules. We have the code associated to the user form, and all the code that's going to be performed within the user form is going to be here. We just indent a bit, and the simplest one, unloads and me. And me refers to the user form itself. So now if we run that, see that the cancel button works. Okay, now that we have our cancel button, let's go ahead and make sure that when our form is initialized, we have our locations for import listed up here. I'm going to go in the code, and in our user form initialize, I'm going to add a comment here that starts with a single quote, and this is going to be import locations setup. Our controller, our Dropbox was called import location, and if we press Ctrl J, it's going to suggest some things, and this is our combo box that we're looking for. I'm just going to use tab to auto-complete it. And first we want to start by adding an item that's going to be called new file. So we always want to have this one at the top. Then we need to add all the open workbooks, and we're going to use a for each loop to do that. So I'm going to go here at the top and define a variable using dim wb as workbook. Okay, and you can see that once you leave the line, everything colors up, and this is a great way to know if your code was typed in properly. And now let's do our for each loop. So for each workbook in application, this references Excel as a whole .workbooks, which is a collection item of all the open workbooks. And for all of those, we want to do something, and as soon as we are done, we want to go to next workbook. First, we want to import lock combo box. We want to add item, and this item is going to be the working book, that the current workbook dot name. This is going to add the name of the workbook as an option in our dropdown. But if we just do that, we'll also see our personal XLSB file. And I don't want to have that. So I'm just going to type in an if statement and check if the current workbook, as we're looping through, if its name is different from personal.xlsb, then we wanted to add it to the list, And here I'm going to close the if function with the end if. And that's our code pretty much. So let's run that and see if it works. Okay, as soon as we open that, you can see here that we have a new file as an option and our book 1, which is the only open file that we have right now. But I want this to have new file selected by default. Let's go to cancel, go back to the view code, and the easiest way to do that is, because we know that we have this option in the list, new file, we can just set the value of the combo box to new file. So import lock combo box dot value equals to new file. And because it's the same value, this is going to be the selected one. Okay, now we have new file and we can pick something else. Usually when you want to run that, you would want to pile up all different files that you select here in a new file. So this is going to be the default option up here. Okay, there's something else that I want to make sure that we do in our initialize function, and this is we want to set up our list view files with the columns and everything so that we can then use it to add the files that we browse for here. Go back to the code, and here I'm actually going to start with that before I loop through. Set up files list view. Just going to use the with functionality. So this allows us to pick, say, list view files, our list view, and append different things with the dot to it. So we just need to remember when we're doing with that we need an end with. And the first thing I want to do is I want to set the view to report. I want to make sure we already enabled those from the user form builder, but I'm just going to enable them from here in the checkboxes. I want to make sure that, forget the dot, that when we select a row, it's a full row select. So it selects the full row and not only the cell that we are in. So this is also going to be true. I want to show grid lines. So true. And I also want to disable hide selection. I want the selection to be visible. The label edit will be manual. And we want to make sure that hide column headers is set to false. The good thing with using with is that we can nest with into itself. So here we can type in with dot column headers, this one, and with. And we want to make some adjustments to the column headers, namely we want to add their values. So the first thing I want to do, it's a good practice, is to always clear it. So if by any chance this runs twice, we won't end up with a multiple of the same headers. And then I'm going to have add. I don't want to take care of the index, so I'm just going to use the comma. I don't want to take care of the key as well. Let it do that automatically because we don't need it for our functionality. And the text I want here is going to be name. And the width I'm going to set at 100. As the other arguments are optional, I don't need to worry about them. So I'm just going to go below and add a new column, which is going to be location. Let's make this one 210. Okay, let's go ahead and test if this works. Okay, perfect. We now have our name and our location here as well. We can adjust the width after that once we make sure that everything fits better. Now that we're done with that, the next thing we want to do is make sure that our browse button can actually add files to this list. In order to do that, we'll need, let's run this just for a second. You see that we have the location and we have the name. When we use getOpenFileName, which is a method within VBA that we can use to get the full path of files that we can then open, it's going to give us the full path. So we'll need a function to get only the file name of the file. I looked through internet and found a really useful function. So let's just go ahead and type it in. I like to put the functions above the subroutine. So those here, those are subroutines, and they pretty much just execute code. What we want to add now is a function. Call it get file name. Val path string as string, and this is gonna return as string. Okay, end function. And now what we want to do, we want to extract the file name from the file path. Let's type it out, and then we're gonna illustrate it with an example. It's a recursive function that's a function that calls itself within it. So what we want to see is if the write from path string, so if the one character on the right, if it's different than slash, basically when we have a file name, what we want to get is everything after the last slash. So this function goes from the back and just piles all the characters until it meets that. And if it meets that, it will just return the string because the if statement will not be true. And here we also want to make sure that path string's length, this is the length of the string, which is pretty much the number of characters. If it's above 0, then we want to do some stuff with it, and otherwise end if. And what we want to do is we want to return for get file name, we want to return get file name. We're going to use the same function, and here we want to give it only the rest of the path string. So if the last character is not a forward slash, then we want to remove it and give the rest to the function again. So left path string len path string -1. So this is gonna take all the characters to the left without the last one. Let me close this one again, and here we want to append this last string. Okay, here's our function. Let's move it to the side and take a look at an example. If we give the function this parameter, path to project, path to file, file.xosx, what it's going to do is it's going to take the rightmost character, which is going to be our x, and it's going to see if it equals to backslash. If it doesn't, it's going to just put it to the side and go ahead and provide the rest of the string to our function. And this is the recursive part. It's going to ask for the function within the function. So it's going to check again if our s is equal to a backslash, and if it's not, it's going to put that to the side as well. Our function is going to keep calling itself and just putting the characters to the side. So at some point, we're going to get to the whole file name, file.xlx. And at that point, it's going to take the backslash and compare that to a backslash. The logic will no longer be true, and our if statement is going to execute, and our function will return the file.xlx string. So this is the function. Let's go ahead and prepare our browse button. Okay, I'm gonna go back here and just double click on the browse button. It's gonna create a browse button click event where we can type our code. First, we're gonna define a few variables. We're gonna need a files array. Just gonna define it as a variant, which is capable of taking any form that we throw at it. We're also gonna need a file path variable as a string. We're gonna use one of Excel's built-in functions to add all the selected files to an array. It's gonna be an array of strings, and then we're gonna loop over it and use the file path to assign each of the items here to the file path through our loop and add it to our list view. Let's first make sure that we get our files array. This is gonna be application.getOpenFileName. First, we're gonna provide it a filter, and you can see how to write those. I'm just gonna go with Excel files. Then we'll have our filter index. This is something we don't need, and our title will be select files. Our button text will be load files, and we want to allow multi-select. What this will do is open a file selection window where we can select multiple files of this file type and use that to import all the files just as strings to their paths into our files array. Then what we want to do is we want to grab our list view files with the with statement. Within that, let's actually define a few more variables, and I know it's not always a good practice, but because I'm going to be using them in this portion of code, I prefer to define them here. So we need a list item as list item, and then we need a sublist item, which I'm just going to define as variant, because I'm not sure what the variable type would be for a sublist item. Next, we're going to write our loop. Before we write our loop, I want to make sure that if no files are selected, this doesn't throw an error, our loop. And that's why we're going to add an onError resume next, which pretty much makes sure that if our loop gives out an error, it's just going to resume with the subroutine, and it's just going to end. So it won't throw an error for the user if they, let's say, click cancel on this browse window. Our loop will be for I equals to 1 to ubound, will give us the upper bound of the files array. Going to loop from 1 to the upper bound of the files array. So we're going to loop through each one of those. We're going to close our loop with next I. And if we just do it like that, it's fine. You can just use next I, or if you're using some more specific circumstance, you can use a step variable here. So let's say step 2 will only loop through every second file. But because this is pretty much the basic case, it just recognizes it and it should work. Now we're going to set our list item to .list items. Remember, we're using with list view files. So if we type in .list items, it's going to be the list items in this list view. List items.add. I don't want to take care of the index. I don't want to take care of the key. You remember that our first column that we defined here is our file name, and our second one is our location. So for the first one, we can just use our function that we just wrote, get file name and files array, and I want the I index for that, so that it would go and loop through every single one. How many we need to close, and then this one. Yep. Then I want our sublist item to be the list item dot list subitems dot add, and again, no index, no key, and for the text we just want the full path. And the reason we're doing it like that is because in a list view, you have your list item is only your first cell, so your data for the first column, and then all the next cells for the next columns are sublist items to this list item. Let me just clean this a bit, and this should be our browse button click subroutine. It would allow us to select files, and then it would just go over all the files and add them to our list view. Let's see if this works. I'm gonna hit browse. Okay, and I have here some files from my intro to Excel for accounting and finance course. And you can see that I can only see Excel files. So if I select all those and click open, you can see that we have them here. And here we get just the name. And here we have the full path to the file. Next thing I want to do is make sure that our select all, select none, and remove selected buttons work, because right now if let's say I added this file by accident, there's no way for me to remove it. I have to either process all the files or cancel and then go back and select all the other files again. Let's hit cancel and make sure that we add a subroutine for our select all button click. We're gonna loop through all the list items in our list view and just make sure to switch their checked parameter to true. We're gonna need, let's say R for row, because we're going to be looping through all the rows in the table as integer. And then for R equals to 1 to list view files dot list items dot count. So we're going to loop from 1 to the number of items that we have in our list view. Just make sure to add next R. List view files dot list items R, our index, dot checked equals to true. Our select none button will do pretty much the same, but just select it to false. So what we can do is we can just copy paste this, change the name to match the name of our button, and it was select none button click. Make sure that this is set to false. Let's see if those work. First, we need to add some files, and then select all, put check marks everywhere, and select none removes them. Okay, now it's time to make sure our remove selected button works as well. Double click on it to create the click event, and now I'm gonna need, let's say, our count. Well, we could have used R again, but okay, let's use our count. So this is our counter for our rows as integer. And here's our loop. So for our count equals to, and what we're going to do here is we're going to reverse our loop, because if we loop through the list items and remove, let's say, the third one, this would reorder our list items and will no longer have the same number. So it would be hard to loop through the rest. It's going to throw up an error. So what we're going to do is we're going to reverse our loop. So we're going to start from list view files dot list items dot count, the number of list items, and we're going to go to 1. And that's why here we're going to have a step of -1. So let's say we have 5 files, it's going to get 5 for 5 list items, and it's going to use the step of -1 to count to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Next, our count. And here what we want to do is make sure that the checked items are removed. While we're looping through those, we're going to check if list view files dot list items are count. So if the list item with this index dot checked, we can either have equals true, and sometimes I prefer to do that just to make it more obvious what we're doing, but here is just okay to leave it like that because it's going to be pretty much if true. Then, and if, what we want to do is list view files dot list items dot remove, and the index is going to be our count. Let's see if this one works. Okay, browse, just grab all those files. Let's say we want to remove everything for fixed asset, remove selected, and it works. Okay, and you might notice that it's a bit hard because you have to click exactly in the checkbox. I would really prefer, if it's possible, to be able to select and deselect those by clicking on the whole row. Let's go ahead and implement that. And to do that, we're going to use the event of clicking on the list view files object. We can just double click on this here, and it created a before label edit, which is something that we don't need. What we need is item click. So I'm just gonna go here and have item click. Just remove this one. This subroutine is executed every time we click on an item. So what we want to do here is just reference to this item here. Let me just lowercase. We want to check if item.checked is true, then we want to make item.checked equals to false, else we want to make item.checked equals to true. Now when we run our user form and we select all those files, when we click it, it's going to get selected, and then when we click it again, it's going to lose the check mark. So the only thing that's left to do is to write our process all files subroutine. Something that we need to consider is what would happen if we have the same sheet names within different files. What we want to do in such a case is just change the name of the sheet to maybe a combination of the sheet name and the file if it's even long enough, because as you know, sheet names can only have 30 symbols. Let's go ahead and first create a function that's going to help us to do that. I'm going to put it right here at the top. It's going to be our function worksheet exists. And it's going to take the sheet name as a string and also an optional workbook as workbook. And it's going to return a boolean. A boolean is a true or false value. You're going to need to define the sheet as worksheet. Worksheet, and we need to check if workbook, the one that we defined here, is nothing, so it's not provided. Then we're gonna set workbook equal to active workbook. Okay, and this is a short if-then syntax where we just check one thing and then we have one result. You can just write it on a single line, so we don't need to add the end if statement at the end. The next thing we want to do is we want to set our sheet to equal workbook, and we're going to reference the sheets collection, sheet name. So what this does is it sets our variable here to be equal to the sheet with the current sheet name that's provided within the workbook, either the provided workbook or the active workbook. Actually, we're going to wrap that with an on-error resume next. And here, you're going to go on error go to 0. So this would make sure that if there's no such worksheet in this workbook, it won't throw an error. Here, we're going to set our function return value. So what it's going to return, not sheet is nothing. That way we're gonna give either true or false. If the sheet is nothing, this will be given as a false. Sheet is nothing is gonna return true if it's if there's no such sheet, and then our function will reverse it to a false and it's gonna return false. I can see here that I have a typo. You can see that this didn't capitalize like this, so I need an S here, and now it's fine. The only thing that's left for us to do is to write our process all files subroutine. So I'm just gonna double click here and gonna create our process files button click method here. Because this might take a bit longer, I wanna make sure that the user cannot interfere. So we're gonna start by setting some application variables. So display alerts, I wanna have that at false. Also application enable events, I want to have that at false as well. And most important, I want to turn off screen updating so it doesn't show opening all the files and closing them and copying all the sheets. And it's really important to make sure, and as soon as we put those in, just make sure that we have them at the end of our subroutine set to true. And actually here we're gonna add one more, and it's gonna be application ask to update links. We're gonna set that to false. And the reason to do that is because we wanna be able to have a loop that goes over all the files that we have selected and just copies everything. And some of the files might pop up a question. Do you want to update the links depending on what the settings of the user's Excel version are? So we just want to make sure that this doesn't break our subroutine. And I'm also going to remember to turn it back to true after we are done. Let's set some variables. We'll need a path variable as a string that's going to store our current path. We also need a file name variable, a string that we're going to use to append it at the end of the sheet name if the sheet matches the exact same sheet in another workbook. Workbook as workbook. Also want to have the new workbook. This workbook is going to be the workbook we're currently opening. So when we're looping through all the list items, all the files. And our workbook new will be our destination workbook. So where we're going to be copying all the files. And we're also going to need a sheet that we're going to use to loop over all the sheets in each workbook. Let's first just do it with a new file. So if we have selected new file, what we want to happen here is we want our workbook new to equal application workbooks add. This will create a new workbook and attach it to our variable. And we're going to change that later to make sure that if we have selected another file, we're going to be using this workbook. Here, I'm actually going to define a couple more variables because we're going to be looping over our list view. We need a list item. Also, we need a sheet name that we're going to be using to change the copied sheet name as a string. Now that we have all our variables, we can go ahead and start looping. And what we want to do is we want to loop over each file and then loop over each sheet within each file. Our loops are going to be two loops nested within each other. So for each list item in list view files dot list items, we're going to do some things and then have the next list item. And this list item pretty much refers to each file that we have selected. Once we have our list item, we're going to set our workbook, and this is going to be the variable that refers to the currently open workbook, and it's going to equal application.workbooks.open. And we're just gonna grab the first subitem. Remember that the file name is the list item and our file path is our sub list item. As we only have one, we can just refer to it with one here, and this is gonna take the first workbook from our list and open it. Now that we have it open, we wanna loop through all the sheets. So for each sheet in workbook.worksheets, on next sheet. What we want to do after we are done with our loop that we're going to write here for copying the sheets, we want to make sure to close the workbook that we have opened, and we want our save changes. And because I'm not going to list all of the options here, I'm just going to use this syntaxes to make sure that it only takes this parameter. Here where we loop over our worksheets within our workbook, what we want to do is make sure that we set our sheet name to left our actual sheet name within this file, and just gonna append the file name just to make sure that it's easier to identify them after that. So I'm taking the sheet name that we're looping through, and then I'm taking the workbook name and adding a dash in the middle. I'm using left because I'll limit this to 30. So I don't have to check if it's above 30 so that it won't throw an error. After that, what I want to do is get this sheet and copy it. I want to copy it after workbook new dot sheets workbook new dot sheets dot count. So this would give me the number of sheets, and I'm going to copy it after selecting this sheet. So it's going to be, if we have 50 sheets up to now, it's going to get 50 here and use it as an index for the sheet collection. So it's going to pretty much add it at the end. We're going to say, if not, worksheet exists, sheet name. So we're checking if this sheet exists, and if it doesn't exist, then we're gonna apply this name. So if not worksheet exists, sheet name in our workbook new, then and end if, then we want to make sure that our active sheet and the sheet that we're copying becomes the active sheet automatically. So we want to make sure that its name is set to sh name. We prepare our sheet name, then we copy our sheet, and if this sheet name exists in our destination workbook, then we skip that. But if it doesn't exist, then we assign the name to this worksheet that we just copied. The only thing left to do here is make sure that we unload the user form after we're done. Okay, let's see how does that work. Okay, we have new file, and to remember we haven't yet implemented it to be able to look through the files and pick one. Have it at new file, browse, select all those files, open them. Let's remove one just to make sure that this still works, and process all files. Let's see what happens. Okay, it's thinking, and so far no errors, which is a good sign. Okay, what we have here, I think now we have, yep, all the sheets here, and you can see that each sheet has the sheet name and then the file name, and it's all trimmed up to 30 characters because that's how much we can have. Our form also closed after it was done. So now let's implement the option to select our file. Here we're just gonna add if our import location combo box, I think it was, if the value equals new file, that's at least the easiest way I think, then we're gonna set that, and else we're gonna do something else. If it's not new file, then our workbook new will equal our application.workbooks. Here, just gonna have our import location combo box dot value. Let's see if that works. Okay, we have book one already open, so let's just pick book one. Select a couple of files and process them. Now we have them here in our book one. That was how to quickly prototype something that you need for your work and then just go ahead and type it out in VBA. And I really hope you'll be able to use that in your day-to-day work. For me, it's really easy, especially when I have to assemble a lot of sales files from different departments and different sales agents, and just want to have everything in the same file so I can process it and just perform my analytics. That was it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It was really much longer than my usual length, but I just wanted to share this awesome tool that you can build for yourself, and while building it, extend your Visual Basic for Applications knowledge. Thank you for watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you're not already, and maybe even punch the bell icon to receive notifications every time I upload a new video. Till then, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.